You're listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast, a podcast for Shopify store owners that brings you concrete examples on how to build and grow your e-commerce business. My name is Scott Austin, and I have an e-commerce agency named Jade Puma. In this podcast, I'll share my e-commerce insights and best practices with you. Hey, Scott Austin here. For this episode, I have a guest, and we go deep into A/B testing. So deep that the interview is over an hour and a half long. So I've divided it into two parts. This is part one, and part two can be found in episode 95 of the podcast. So here's part one. Hey everybody, Scott Austin here, and this week we have another guest for you, Josh Frank, who's the founder and head of optimization for Test Triggers. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I'm excited to share some knowledge with the audience today.
Excellent. And can you explain to me what Test Triggers is? What type of company do you have?
Yeah, so we're a conversion rate optimization agency. In a past life, I had headed up e-commerce at a few different companies, and as I talked to people at conferences and such, I became known as like the A/B testing guy. And so one of the companies I was at was acquired and kind of left me looking for the next opportunity. And I said, why not just lean into being the conversion optimization and A/B testing guy? So it's been probably close to 7 years now of doing that. And, getting to see the inside of many e-commerce businesses is fun, and look for ways to optimize and grow their revenue.
So you've been doing, so CRO is the acronym for conversion rate optimization. And you've been doing that as a dedicated function of your agency for more than 7 years, you said. So
Yeah.
You've probably seen hundreds and hundreds of clients, I would imagine.
Absolutely. If you went into my Google Analytics, the amount of clients I have access to, many of which should have probably turned that off by now, but maybe a quick note to go check your analytics admin page to see what old agencies still have access to your analytics. But yeah, I've seen hundreds of e-commerce businesses inside and out.
That's awesome. So can you explain for those who don't understand what CRO is, a little definition of CRO?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure your audience is familiar with SEO, search engine optimization, right? Where we're trying to optimize the page, the content on your page and the links to your page to make you rank higher in Google. Conversion rate optimization is trying to optimize the percentage of visitors that visit your site that actually end up buying, right? For every 100 visitors that come, if 5 buy, you have a 5% conversion rate. Conversion rate optimization is looking at things like copy, imagery, site layout, messaging, clarity, urgency, all these little things to try and help boost that percentage as much as possible, which the benefit of CRO work is, instead of something like paid ads where as soon as you turn them off, they're gone, right? The efforts of CRO kind of last beyond just the changes that are made.
A lot of people that want to do CRO, I'd like you to set a little expectation for them. Let's say I'm an average Shopify store, whatever you think of as average, and my conversion rate is 3% today. If I went through a CRO process, how much can we move that? Can I go from 3% to 10%? Or are we talking 3% to 3.1%? I just want to have people have their expectations set properly.
The rule of thumb that I like to use is that your average order value and your conversion rate are sort of intertwined, in the sense that if your average order value is $1,000, a 1% conversion rate would be outrageously good, right? To the point where I tend to see, if you have an average order value as high as $1,000, that your conversion rate is somewhere around 0.1%. If your average order value is $100, your baseline conversion rate is somewhere around 1%, and as that pattern might go. So as far as improvements to be made, the first thing I always do is go into Google Analytics and look at my conversion rate by device, look at it by browser, by all these different technical aspects to see, is there somewhere where something is broken? And this is sort of the first thing we do with any client is what we call the FBS rule: fix broken shit.
Yep.
So if you go into analytics and you see that, Chrome on a specific brand of phone has a 0.2% conversion rate, and everywhere else you're somewhere around 1.5%, it's likely you need to get one of those devices or get a great browser testing account, get some user testers, and see what might be broken there. So I would say, when I talk to clients, if they're very established, we might say, hey, looking at a 15% increase in conversion rate is massive for you. With less established companies, we might say there's more to be had there. But yeah, no one's conversion rate is going to go from 2 to 10. And any blog post that tells you that, you should run from.
Yeah, and that's exactly the answer I was expecting from you. I like the 15%, which is 15% increase in revenue, which is super important. But it's not like you're doubling or tripling. And those get rich quick people with their Lamborghinis in the YouTube video are full of crap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if we were going to talk about SaaS or software sites, sure, you can make larger gains because your value proposition has a lot more fluidity and opportunity for change. The truth about e-commerce is, for most brands, simple as this may sound, your value proposition, excuse me, is an image gallery, right? They just see the thing and they go, oh, I kind of get this t-shirt, this hat, this, off-road tire. So there's not necessarily as much, there's so much, sort of me tooism. It's hard to really differentiate with the value proposition, which is where so much of the growth comes from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for our Shopify store owners, which is the audience for this podcast, what are a few tools that they can use in the world of CRO, or how should they start their CRO journey?
So the first thing I would do is have some sort of qualitative analytics tool installed. That might be Microsoft Clarity, which is 100% free, at least for now, or a tool like Hotjar. Those would be one thing I would have to have in my sort of what we would call a CRO stack.
So can you explain, when you say qualitative, what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So all data comes in two forms, quantitative and qualitative. The easiest way to separate this is quantitative is just looking at the numbers, right? Going into Google Analytics and saying, this is my conversion rate at this average order value. Qualitative is when you are looking at surveys from customers, poll questions from customers. I even lump in things like heat maps, visitor recordings, sort of more what people like to say as less scalable research. But I think its importance it can't be understated. So if, let's say, you have a qualitative tool like a Hotjar, which is really, really popular.
Is Hotjar free? Or is there a free level of Hotjar? What does it cost?
I believe there is they've changed their prices a few times in the last year. So I believe there's still a free or basic plan that's pretty inexpensive. And the only reason I would nod for the Hotjar plan ahead of Microsoft Clarity is just that Hotjar gives the ability to ask sort of little on-site survey questions. I'm sure we've all seen them. And if us as sort of marketers and people online all day might get frustrated by them, but I assure you they're well worth the small nag they might cause. So again, Hotjar has that polling function and Microsoft Clarity does not. There are a million different things we could talk about with Hotjar. I'll just mention one thing, which is everyone needs to be running a post-purchase survey, right? So somebody's made a purchase and they are asked a simple question, something to the effect of, what doubts or hesitations did you have before purchasing this product? And then leave that as an open text answer. No drop downs, no radio buttons. The thing that this question does, and what makes this specific question so powerful, is instead of a question before the purchase saying, looks like, don't leave us. Why aren't you adding to cart today? One, they might not be a qualified person to even answer that question. They'll likely just say price. They don't mean price. They mean that the value of this product isn't enough for them to pull the trigger. When you ask true customers, you'll get things like, I was really nervous about the sizing on these shoes. I've heard that they run small. Or you might see, I was concerned that this product wouldn't fit that situation. And you can then use that to feed your copy and all sorts of things. So that's on the qualitative side. On the quantitative side, we heavily use a tool called Google Optimize. Google Optimize is Google's free A/B testing tool. I would say 9 times out of 10, it will work for what you have. Even though it's free, it's an absolutely wonderful tool. I use it with almost every client that I have. And it allows you, again, to go in, change the design of a page, and then test that against your original to see what the potential conversion rate lift would be.
Awesome. So I want to ask one question on Hotjar before we move on to Google Optimize. On Hotjar, is that the tool that does the post-checkout survey question?
You can, yeah. So you use a tool in there called, I believe it's just called surveys or polls. And you just say, it says, what page do you want it to run on? You pop in your order confirmation page and you have the slide up poll. Yeah, absolutely. And reviewing that with your team, again, it's just incredibly insightful information.
So if I understand what you're leading up to is you've got this qualitative Hotjar or other tools, and what you're doing there is you're trying to understand consumers' mindset, and that's going to give you ideas that you want to test, and then you go through and do that in quantitative testing with Google Optimize. Is that how the two are working together?
Yeah, absolutely. There are things we see in Google Analytics that we sometimes we see a number and we go, is 70% a good bounce rate, a bad bounce rate? I don't know. Do I want my time on site to be high or low? And the truth is, without any qualitative backing, the numbers are pretty useless, right? Because I can make a case that a high time on site is a good thing because people are spending more time on your site. Obviously, I can make a case that it's a bad thing because people aren't able to find what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're so they're navigating out of losslessness. We need the qualitative side of it to understand what's actually happening and pair the two together. I think this is probably the biggest missing link when it comes to trying to make changes. People go into Google Analytics and say, okay, my conversion rate isn't high enough. Then they go Google, CRO best practices, and they start implementing one after the other. And those won't be fine-tuned to your store and your experience and your customers unless you pair them with some qualitative feedback as well.
The way I say it is every best practice you hear out there is absolutely true for the person saying it. But that doesn't mean that it's true for your store, your products, your customer, and your business model. You gotta test those things, not just implement them.
Absolutely. And even to add another layer to that, it may be that that best practice will work for your store, but not exactly the way that that author implemented it, right? You might need just a touch of your own qualitative understanding to see, oh, that was the small tweak to that made it work for me, as opposed to, again, doing nothing.
Yeah, and I've always been amazed. Like I've talked to founders of companies like Facebook and LinkedIn, people that were there early on. And it's always amazed me at how well they know their customer, and like with really intricate detail. It's just beautiful to see that. And a lot of store owners get that level of understanding by talking to their customers because they have physical retail stores or they go to farmers markets and those and you get wonderful feedback at those. But it's really hard for that online store owner to understand their customer's mindset. And that's where I see that the qualitative stuff you're talking about is you're trying to understand your customer's thinking and rationale as it relates to your products.
100%. An exercise we go through with clients we call Cornerstone FUDs. FUD stands for fears, uncertainty, and doubts. So when we ask these questions, like we talked about previously, we're looking for trends. We're looking to categorically put these together and say, okay, these are the three things that while our customer is going to a product page, that hesitation before they hit add to cart, right? All those thoughts they're having throughout that funnel, we know what covers about 80% of them, right? It's one of these three things.
Mm-hmm.
So we now can go back and at each step of the funnel, put some, whether it's some small little value prop sections, some bits of micro copy. Maybe it's a video that helps to explain things. I don't, the implementation sort of, is up to what data you see and how it, how it might be placed. But you can then go back and test things in Google Optimize. Now, one thing, one of the biggest caveats and one of the large pitfalls I see with Google Optimize is some stores are simply not ready to use it. And what I mean by that is the traffic needed to get statistical significance in a reasonable amount of time with an A/B test is, depending on your existing conversion rate, somewhere around 75,000 visits per month. And some of you might be going, oh, this is crap. I can't use this. It's not that you can't. It's just going to take a lot more work and a lot more time and a lot more frustrated, inconclusive results than perhaps if you did the qualitative side, made out your list. You may not be able to say this change specifically led to a 12% increase in conversion rate. But if you are starting with the quantitative and saying, here are areas where we need help, and adding in the qualitative, here's what our customers said about what they, what drove them to purchase this, you are way, way ahead of the game. And if you have enough traffic to split test, wonderful. I suggest split testing, exactly how you might counteract those fears, uncertainty, and doubts.
So without being too scientific, can you explain that term statistical relevance and like how store owners should think about that?
Yeah, for sure. So the easiest way to explain like statistical significance or p-values is we're trying to determine that if you have two options, option A and option B, if option B performs better, we're trying to determine, is that delta, is that change in performance due to the actual difference between the two pages, or is it simply due to chance? I suppose an example would be if we flipped a coin 10 times and 7 times it came up heads, it doesn't mean that coin is actually more likely to turn up heads. We've only flipped it 10 times. So that's sort of how it would go. That's for sure a rudimentary explanation, but we would need to flip that coin enough times so that it would measure out to, and if we flipped it 10,000 times and 7,000 times it came up heads, maybe there is something about that coin, right? Mm-hmm. But we have to get that level of traffic in order to actually tell, is the change we are seeing a result of a difference between the two pages, or is it just simply a result of chance?
The way I do it with Google Optimize is I just trust whatever Google says. When Google says your test is complete and this is the winner, I'm like, okay, I believe you. Is that the way we should do that, or is there a better way?
There's a better way, and that's not saying that trusting Google Optimize is inherently bad. Google Optimize has has ways that they determine the statistical significance and when to stop a test. We sort of come up with it. We come up with a set of rules for each client specifically for a couple of reasons. One, every client's level of traffic is different. And also every client, their tolerance for risk is also different. So, and that's where it becomes nuanced. If we're talking about things we want to rubber stamp as like this is for sure a result of our change, we like to see at least 2 full weeks being tested, at least 250 conversions inside of each funnel. So that means original variation 1, variation 2. And then we also like to see the 95% or plus statistical significance. And we use, if you were to Google something like, I believe would be the best one to look at now is CXL A/B test calculator. CXL, if anyone's not familiar, is a blog ran by Pete Blaja, who's just a very renowned CRO author, writer. It's one of the rare gold stars that I'll give to a blog and say pretty much everything you see on that blog is going to be accurate and not BS. So CXL would be the name of that. Running it through that calculator can also help you to put some guardrails on. Is what I'm seeing real or is what I'm seeing fake? I tend to see a fair amount of Google optimized screenshots on Twitter that show, the original got 5 conversions and the variation got 15 conversions. Look at this incredible uplift. That's crazy. One of the first things we do with the client is we run an AA test. The only reason we're running an AA test, meaning the original and the variation are exactly the same. We run it for a few days just to ensure that all the goals are tracking properly, right? And that it's just to QA that sort of thing. I've seen one of those where after 6 days, it appeared like there was a statistically significant winner when there are no change, right? Think back to the coin flip example we had talked about.
The AA test is verifying that your testing is working. Period.
It's just, it's verifying that, again, the code snippets showing up, that goals are being tracked properly, but there's no difference in any of the pages, right? Now, obviously, just as an experiment, I said, well, let's let this run our full 2 weeks. And obviously, by the end of that 2 weeks, it had come back almost to exactly 50-50. So that's why we have a couple of different safeguards.
So let's take a step back on Google Optimize. If I'm a Shopify store, I don't have that implemented yet. How do I get that set up?
Yeah, it's really easy. So Google Optimize, just like Tag Manager, just like Google Analytics itself, will give you a snippet that you can then put, I believe it's, theme settings, preferences, you'll drop that in there. Or if you already have Google Tag Manager installed, you can look up like a Google Optimized Tag Manager installation where you can drop that in. I would say the preference would be to have it installed outside of Tag Manager, just because if you think about it, you are asking the page, you're asking your Shopify page to load and also load a script that's going to change some elements on the page. The more you can keep the optimized script outside of Tag Manager and as high up in the page as possible, the higher likelihood that those changes happen quickly, as opposed to you get something called flashing, which is like you see the original, then real quick it changes to the variation. So yeah, that's kind of the best practices for implementation. I believe you might even be able to use a tool like Elevar to implement this, which is like a kind of an advanced tracking tool. But yeah, there are plenty of resources out there to get it installed.
the beginning, Shopify store, they're just going to go create their Google optimized account, which I don't know why Google makes you create a separate account for every one of these, even though you can use the same Google address. But you got to go create a separate account, and they give you that script like you're saying, and they're going to go and edit their theme code. They have to be comfortable doing that. They're going to take that little script, which is a little piece of JavaScript, you just copy and paste, and you're going to put it in theme.liquid. If I remember correctly, they tell you, like you're saying, really high, like right underneath the head tag. But the instructions are really clear, and it is just a simple copy and paste of code, and then boom, it's amazing to me how well it works.
Yeah, and once you do that, you can actually go back into Google Optimize, and there's a section. Once you start to create a page, it will prompt you to like debug your installation to make sure it's working how it should be. But yeah, I don't know of any marketing script that doesn't say I wanted to install it as high as possible just after the opening head. But the thing about Google Optimize is it's actually modifying content on your page. So having it fire as quick as possible is just going to help the tool work.
Yes, and have it be the least obvious to customers that is happening.
For sure.
Probably very familiar with on their website if they're changing price through a wholesale app or something. The price shows, and then later on the JavaScript overwrites it, and you see the price change. You're trying to explain why you want this thing up higher, so you don't see those changes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the first test someone should do with Google Optimize is the AA, as you explained, right?
Yeah, and again, this doesn't need to run for any more than like a couple of days. All we're doing is saying when we run that AA test, Google Optimize will give you 3 different goals you can track. That's one of the, I put this in, I'm using air quotes here, limitations of Google Optimize. They only let you choose 3 goals, which, by the way, it will pull in goals from Google Analytics, and it will also, you can use transactions, revenue per visitor. You can also just use events, right? So if you have properly set up Shopify to have enhanced e-commerce, that means you have, an add to cart event that fires. You could use that. Now, the reason that I put limitation in quotes is that you can easily, with one click, shoot over each of your original and variants into Google Analytics as a segment. And now you can look at it through any prism you want, right? You can have those two neck and neck with each other and look through any standard Google Analytics report that you would with those two as segments. Yeah, so that all, the AA test really is just to QA that things are working, it's firing. I'm seeing conversions in both sides of the original and variation.
And what would be is there a good second test that people should run, or does it vary for everybody based on their qualitative?
The answer for sure is that it depends on sort of what your store needs. Now, that being said, I would say there are a couple of tests that for us, we have them in our works more often than not column, right? Almost works every time. So that would be, we'll go through a couple of these. One would be on mobile, kind of below your standard header and before your sort of hero graphic. Because typically, categories are very easy to see on desktop, and they're quite, I don't want to say difficult, but they're harder to see on mobile. Usually it's in that hamburger menu. Oftentimes that hamburger menu is top left, which for a right-handed person is the far thumb stretch, right? And I know this might sound really, granular, but this is how people use their phones, right? If you're using
use their phone in the right hand?
Well, yeah, people that do the scrolling, right? They the one-handed.
I asked, I'm right-handed, and I always pick up my phone with my left hand.
So you're a two-handed phone user? So you use just your right hand then to gesture on the phone? Got it. Yes. Yeah. It's I've done so I did one recently, a sort of large in-person user test. Usually I do virtual user testing, a tool like playbook.ux or usertesting.com. But I did one sort of a group one, and it was pretty much half and half. And the younger the person, the more likely they were to use like one hand, which I thought was interesting. But back to the point on the mobile test, I would pull out your highest performing categories, and you get more points if those categories are curated. Meaning, what's an example store you'd want to talk about? What do they sell?
Your Thanksgiving supplies or something. Is that what you like?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're a home goods store, right, you might usually just have artwork, kitchen supplies, yada, yada, yada. Right now, you would want to have Thanksgiving decorations, things like that are a little more curated, a little more topical. And you put those as sort of buttons between your standard header and your hero graphic. And also you can make those horizontally scroll on mobile. So you can get 6 or 7 of them in there. That works almost every time for us. Sometimes it takes a couple turns to get the categories right, but you're simply pulling out really profitable, high converting categories and not hiding them behind, a hamburger bar.
Yep. And just so that people understand, they'd have to, if they're in the sections anywhere, Online Store 2.0, it's easy to actually add a section. You can put it in the header. It would be a custom section with a little bit of code. It's not that hard to do. Probably not something the average Shopify store owner would be able to code themselves, but they could get a Shopify expert to do that really easily, and it wouldn't take much to do it. And then that would be a good A/B test to start off with.
Sure, and even if you're sort of developer restricted, if you put that, maybe if you just made a sort of a 2-column section with 3 buttons in a row, right? 3 and 3, right? Yep. It's really just that, you want to be pulling out your good profitable categories for sure. If I think of one that's maybe more global or even, desktop related, whatever, it would really be, and this is going to sound cliche and sound like a broken record, but you would be surprised how many companies still don't do this. It's on a product page, tell me exactly when this product is going to ship.
Yep.
And when it's likely to arrive to me. So, if it says like in stock, ships today, in stock, delivered in 3 to 4 days, those types of messages, now more than ever, right? We might be in better shape than we were with all of these, supply chain issues, but still it's on people's mind, and, the 800-pound gorilla of Amazon is always going to tell them precisely when it gets to them. This isn't a call out to copy everything Amazon does, but in that sense, that is a bit of your competition there. So letting people know this is when it will ship and this is when it will get to you is a conversion winner.
Yep. So on that first test they're setting up, you'd mentioned goals earlier. You want to explain how the goals work and what a Shopify store should set for goals and if that varies?
Yeah, absolutely. Traditionally, for most tests, our goal breakdown is this: transactions, revenue per visitor, and add to carts or cart visits. So we're trying to see, obviously, can we influence strict conversion rate, which is going to be transactions, right? And then if we're testing something, we might be testing something that's going to increase average order value, some sort of upsell. We'll want to look at revenue per visitor, see if we can affect that number, and then throw something else in like add to carts or checkout starts, something like that, to see, hey, perhaps we drove 18% more add to carts, but we couldn't quite get that transaction number above a statistically significant number. All right, well, one is like, is there something happening where, is there something in cart or checkout, a surprise shipping charge, something like that, that's not allowing this test to sort of like, you're getting a lot more interest, but they're not quite going to make it to the end. So that's when I would start to look at stuff like that. Those are pretty standard, the 3 goals we do. You can obviously do goals too, like email signups. Does our, if you've got one of those spinning wheel of discounts, okay, like how much does that actually work versus a standard email capture, things like that.
So on the goal side of things, is one of the things I don't think we've even mentioned yet is for Google Optimized, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to have Google Analytics installed in your store, correct?
Correct. It uses Google Analytics for its reporting, basically, and it just brings that stuff in. So yeah, you have to have a GA installation.
Now, if you install GA out of the box, which is not optimized for a Shopify store, but if you turn on the e-commerce tracking, which is a Shopify setting and a Google Analytics setting, is that going to get you enough settings set properly that you can do transaction goals and add to cart goals? Or are you going to have to optimize your Google Analytics setup even more than that?
No, as long as you have e-commerce turned on, enhanced e-commerce also, again, and like you said, that's a setting in both Shopify and Google Analytics. That will give you transactions, that will give you revenue per visitor. And I want to say, I believe the event is actually called product added. So if you go to behavior and events, you can sort of see, you can find that. And when you're making goals and optimize and make it pretty easy, they say, do you want to use a page view goal or like an event goal? So you say, give me an event goal. And then you can sort of search, and as you search, it'll show, okay, these are the events available. And it'll also give you a little QA snippet that says, like, if you set your settings this way, this goal would have triggered 364 times in the last 7 days. So you go, okay, cool. Does that match up with what I see in analytics? Awesome. You don't particularly need to do anything in GA to make Google Optimize work.
Now, if we're going to be doing a goal of email sign up, we're going to have something with our email. Let's say we're using a Klaviyo pop-up or, a MailChimp script and those kind of things. We'll have to make sure that information is getting into Google Analytics somehow, which is a bit of custom work.
Perhaps one is that, and this I'm actually just not sure of, if out of the box, a tool like Klaviyo is sending an event to GA that says like pop-up triggered, pop-up submitted, pop-up closed, that might already be there. Now, the other trick would be if you simply make your, which I reckon this perhaps should be done anyways. Let's say we have an email pop-up and somebody it hits them from the homepage. They put their email in for 25% off. If you were to take them to like an email success page, hey, thanks so much for signing up. First of all, here's your code. Second of all, here are our top products. Here's a little, like almost like taking them to a landing page for a slightly more engaged customer. You could simply track the page views of that as your goal. Yeah, so that would be another way to do that without necessarily having to get a developer involved.
Yeah, that's a good tip where you can just have the Klaviyo form on success, go to another page, and then use that as the trigger for the success in your Google Optimize test.
Yeah.
So we're back to, our first test setup here, our second test setup, because we did the AA. What other things should people be thinking about as they put that together?
You're talking about the technical aspects of running a test or coming up with test ideas?
I think we're in the implementation, the technical side, because then I do want to have a conversation of, all right, people don't have ideas. What should they have for ideas? Let's start with the technical, like how do they implement this test, structure it, and all that good stuff, and then we'll talk about the ideas.
Yeah, for sure. So we've done our AA test. We're ready to build out, another test. We know how to track goals, right? Because those are all done. Now, here is where, for as much as yes, Google Optimize is a free tool, you will inevitably need to have a developer involved at some point. Now, there are plenty of tests you can run when we're talking about changing out maybe homepage hero section, right? So we're going to change an image and text, which you can do using the point and click Google Optimize editor. I want to be very, very clear about this, though. The more you try and push that, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get editor in Google Optimize, the easier it is to sort of break things. Meaning, yes, it works on mobile, or yes, it works on desktop. Once I shrink down a little bit, it starts to break. You will inevitably need some developer help if you're going to start testing some more advanced things. Now, other ways you can test without a developer, one, like I mentioned, copy tests, sort of button tests, these things that may not yield the biggest possible results, but they are things you can test, is also, let's say you implement a Shopify app, an on-page upsell app, or an app that shows some of the in-stock messaging we had talked about. What you can do is what's called a reverse test. So you implement the app. So the original is going to have whatever this app is, right? And this app, there are apps that take care of a million different conversion optimization things like showing stock messaging. Let's go with that for now. Your original will actually show the in-stock messaging through the app. And now you can just go in your variation, select that, and hide it.
Yep.
So instead of having to use a developer to build out an in-stock situation, you should have used the app to turn it on. And if you time it up properly, you can use maybe your free trial period to test this. You're going to hide that, and now you can go one against another as an A/B test to test things. Again, without a developer, but still test these CRO ideas.
Yeah, and another trick or another hack that I have for that is similar. Is I love the Flex theme. Anyone who's listening to this podcast knows how much I love the Flex theme. It is literally the only theme I've used for the past 3 years. And one of the things I love about it most is every section that I add, I can do custom CSS inside of theme customization. So I'm not going into code, and I can just add a CSS class and CSS variables. So I can have, and I can put something in, and I can call it Google Optimize B, and I can set the CSS to display none. And then in Google Optimize, I can go and change the display to, block or whatever it needs to be. and do an A/B test that way without ever going into the liquid files themselves and doing it all in theme customization. So that's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
for Flex theme and another advantage to Flex, and one of the reasons I find it so powerful.
You could potentially, even cut that step out with Google Optimize in the sense that when you are making changes in Google Optimize, there's a little code icon. If you click that, it will just open up a CSS file for you, and you can just write in there, name it, display none,
Yep.
whatever you want. But it also helps because then you can see all the rules it's writing. Even when you're using the WYSIWYG editor, you can open that up. It'll say, all right, here's kind of what you added from a CSS standpoint. There's also the ability to add global JavaScript. So you just want to, we've done that before where we wanted to add things like countdown timers and things like that. The power of Google Optimize is incredible. But as the famous saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And you won't be helping your conversion rate if you're breaking things in your variation.
And the learning curve, you got to be comfortable with HTML, CSS, and even a little bit of JavaScript. Even if you're not, doing serious coding, you got to be comfortable in looking at those things when you're setting up your Google Optimized test.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we really think of it, you're asking a lot of Google Optimize to say, we have this Shopify store that is, producing thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code to make everything look and operate exactly how we want it. And some of us forget just how dynamic of an experience an e-commerce store is, right? Different variants, different filter source, and things like that. So let's say if we wanted to go in and start messing around with how we display the left-hand sort of filtered navigation on a collection page, all of my like little sirens would be going up because it's a lot different than a static, hero section. The chances that things get a little screwed up there are pretty high. I would, that would be something I would go to my, developers that I use and say, hey, I want to adjust this filter section. Let's make sure though that we're still able to use all the functions and we're not just, it's just easy to sort of trip on your idea when you're doing that.
When you're setting up tests, are most of the tests, or can you do it a couple of different ways? Like you're saying, we can like go in and edit this to display or not display whatever we're doing. Can we also just have an A/B test between two different templates on, where you can just have in the URL, the question mark view equals? Can you do stuff like that with Google Optimize?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do that a couple of different ways, perhaps. The easiest would be just when Google Optimize, as soon as you say, I want to create a new test, it will ask you, do you want an A/B test, which is what we've been discussing this whole time? Do you want a personalization, which is I want to, based on some targeting condition, to show some special piece of content? Do you want a redirect test, which is sort of what you're talking about, which is, maybe I want to test, let's say I'm spending $5,000 a day on paid ads from Facebook, and they're going to my standard product page. And I want to try that versus an unbounced page or a page fly or Shogun page. So I want to go, my standard PDP versus try.url.com or something like that, right? You can make a URL redirect to do that. Then there's also what's called a multivariate test, which I won't even get into because they're astonishingly hard to see results from. But it's basically, if we have 3 different components in each test, I want to see component A with component C, B with A, C, all these different permutations. It's useless. It's a waste of time for 99.999% of websites.
Well, that kind of advice, just don't go there, is really helpful, I find.
Yeah, do not get lured into the multivariate test wormhole.
So the one scenario you mentioned was number 2 on the list, the personalization one. Can you give an example of, because you use some terms, I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? Can you give an example of what a personalization test would look like?
Absolutely. So one of the simplest ones that we've implemented quite often really is adding a little, let's call it an 80-90 pixel header bar on top of everything that says something like, let's say our fulfillment center is in Nashville, Tennessee. So every state within, X amount of miles from that. So we'll pick out the states. We'll say they're going to get a message that says, free 2-day shipping to Kentucky, free 2-day shipping to Ohio. And we might just make that free shipping to California, right? We can't put right. I want to be as specific as we can within reason of how quick something's going to get to you, but simply saying, yes, we ship free to Washington. That small little personalization is helpful. And actually, when we've seen at high traffic levels, that it actually is a conversion rate booster to just say like, yep, we see where you are. We're going to ship there. And if we can bonus tell you how quickly we're going to get there, even better.
So you would have some IP lookup that determines where they're from, and using that show or not show that element.
Yeah, Google Optimize has they have a location targeting where they use they call it region, but it's state. You can target by state, by township, by all sorts of things, and however they do it, it does not prompt a user to get like a, hey, we need to see your location pop up, which is nice. But that's one example on the personalization side. Another one would be if you have influencer campaigns set up, and you get a unique link from an influencer that takes them to your homepage, adding a banner that says like, welcome fans of Scott, your promo code is blank, and have that be constant on the header for those customers coming from an influencer page, so you don't have to create a separate, experience entirely.
Are these tests, or can you also just use Google Optimize to give this personalization level of functionality to your store? Am I running a test, or am I doing it forever?
Yeah, so that's a distinction between an A/B test and a personalization, right? So an A/B test, you are actually trying to judge the efficacy of the change. A personalization is simply, I am trying to implement this change based on these conditions. Now, sometimes when I do a personalization for a client, I will build it as an A/B test, and I will set the traffic of the variation to, let's say, 90%, and withhold a 10% control, just to see like, is this working? Is this hurting? And sort of give some level of data into the mix. But yes, once you state that it's a personalization inside of Google Optimize, it's going to push 100% of traffic to that, as long as they meet the conditions that you say, right? Page type, referrer source, location.
I've been using Google Optimize for quite a while, and I had no idea that you're actually using it not just for tests, but for these types of, I thought that was a test. So that's learning for me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
On our first test, we've got it set up. We figured out our goal. We figured out what A and B are going to be. Once we start that test, what do we do as store owners? Do we look at it every 10 minutes? How do we let the test run?
The advice from everyone is you start it and you never look at it until it matches whatever date range that's bullshit. You're never not going to look. You're never not going to look. Okay. So here's how we do it. Step one is, and again, this is all maybe perhaps a tad dependent on your traffic. The clients I work with tend to have over 100,000 visitors per month, which means a couple things. One, great, we get testing results that are valid, statistically significant, but also if you screw something up, you're screwing it up for a lot of people. So what we do is we launch our test to what we call a pilot audience. There's a setting in analytics called traffic allocation. All that means is, of all the people that fit into this test, what percentage do you want to bucket into this test off the start? So I will turn that down. Yeah, go ahead.
In analytics, was that in analytics or in Optimize?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. In Google Optimize. So it's like all the way down to the bottom of your test setup. I will set that to 20%. And then I will let that run as a pilot audience for 48 hours. I'll go back, I'll look and I'll say, okay, we have conversions happening in the original. We have conversions happening in our variations. Everything looks to be working properly. I will then up that to 100%, kick it back off. Now, for me, as far as checking in on it, usually at that point, it's just, for me, it's just a part of my job, right? It's every, Monday and Wednesday, I check in on tests, make sure everything is, because also here's the thing too, if I have a test, and this doesn't happen often, but it certainly happens, especially if you're really trying to change things and make big enough changes to see a positive impact, you're going to get a dud every once in a while. When I say a dud, I don't mean the conversion rates are the same and it's inconclusive. I mean something that hurts. Yes. Right? Your standard conversion rate's 2.6. This is at 1.1, and it's been 5 days, and okay, we're killing this. It's not going to come back from that. As much as you might love that idea, it's dead. Now, I think this is a really important thing when it comes to creating test ideas. Let's say I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I've gone to analytics and I've seen, you know what, this product page is underperforming. I've then put a survey on that page that says, maybe it's something like, what's missing from this page that would help you make a buying decision? Okay, I've got all those results. I've created something I believe that's going to help fix this. Let's say it's a little box below the add to cart that says, some stuff about shipping, returns, whatever. That's sort of inconsequential. I run that test and it performs terribly. That does not mean that steps 1 and 2 are now invalid. That page is still performing poorly quantitatively. The qualitative data that I gathered is still true and accurate. I just may have missed the mark on the implementation of how we were going to address that problem. So I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see, not just e-commerce companies that are running testing programs, but even inside other agencies and CRO practitioners, is just because a test itself does not perform well does not mean that the test isn't needed, that there's not a chance to have a winner in there. And this same goes for the flip side. If you have a test winner, you've tried something, it's performed wonderfully, the tendency is then to say, okay, well, we've got that figured out. Let's go find something completely different. Wrong. Go right back to that test and say, is there potentially another variation out there that's even better? It's sort of like, this is a cliche analogy perhaps, but if you were digging for gold, you dug and you found some gold, you wouldn't say, oh, great, we found gold, let's pack up and go somewhere else. You're going to keep digging till there's nothing left. And I suggest the same thing for producing test winners. Producing test winners is difficult. Anyone that tells you their hit rate of A/B tests is some astronomical number, they're full of shit. It's a lot like Hall of Fame baseball players, right? You get a hit 3 out of every 10 times, you're in the Hall of Fame. That's a 70% failure rate. Same can be said for A/B testing.
So give me an example, because I like to illustrate things with examples. When you say, all right, I'm going to run a test, pick a winner, and now I'm going to test it again. Give me an example of where you'd run a test and then what the subsequent follow-on test would be.
For sure. So this is nice because it kind of dovetails from what we've been talking about previously, which is talking about in-stock and shipping messaging on a product page. So we ran a test with a client where they previously had no information about whether this product was in stock or not. It didn't say anything about, it said free shipping, but nothing about, the timeliness of the shipping. So we ran a test where we said, in stock, ships today. And that was a wonderful winner for us, as simple as that sounds. I think that there were a couple things at play. One is that people simply like to know, do you have this and is it going to ship to me? And 2, this was at the height of COVID supply chain issues. It was very front of mind that people wanted to know, do you actually have this? Now, what we did after that is we sort of built out a little widget that showed kind of 3 steps, right? And it was like your order, and then it would say, like, let's say it was a Monday. And actually, we built this out. It was smart enough to know like what time it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was before, if it was before 1 p.m.
Oh yeah.
It would say ships today, and then it would say, in transit, and then it would say like arrives to you, and it would say Thursday, right? So it would sort of be this.
And you got to be really careful. It's 1 p.m. store time, and how do you calculate that when the store is in New York, but the customer's in California? And there's some JavaScript things you got to do to make.
It was a JavaScript spaghetti code for sure. But I fought for it in the sense that we know this is obviously very important to customers, and this test in and of itself, this is a large client, right? So it's producing a lot of lift in revenue. I said, let's take some time and try and see, if we go further with this, can it help even more? And back to back, we had winners there. Now the client was sort of like, oh man, now we've got to build out this widget. And I said, true, but at least we know when you are applying dev hours to this task versus many of your other tasks, this one is revenue. This one will pay for itself. So there's an example again of we sort of struck gold a little bit and said, let's not give up here. It's sort of what we call like, local maximum versus global maximum, right? There's sort of, have you reached the truest potential of that idea, or is it simply like this was better than that? We want to try and again go for what's the best possible implementation, which may never actually be possible, but that's the idea.
Makes sense. You talk about time frame for testing, 100,000 users per month. If I have 100,000 users per month, how many days on average will it take before my test is done? If I have, much less, let's say 20,000 users a month, how long are my tests going to take me?
So the factors that drive that, one is simply baseline conversion rate, because it's not actually the amount of traffic that dictates how quickly you can see results. Because even if you have 1 million visitors a month, if you have such a low conversion rate,
Yep.
the only thing that's producing a vote for original or variation is a conversion, right? So if you have lower traffic but you have a very high conversion rate, you're still getting a lot of votes for A or B. So that's sort of what's going to help determine that. Again, I will never run any test for fewer than 2 weeks. I just don't. People behave differently, on different days of the week. And some would say, well, yes, but that's still true for original and variation. When you start seeing the inside of a test and you see how much it can look like it's a slam dunk winner after 3 days, 5 days, only to return to nothingness. And I know this because I've been punched in the gut by this dozens and dozens and dozens of times. You'll understand why at least 2 weeks is important.
I always call that the law of low numbers, right? When there's 9 conversions,
Mm-hmm.
it could be 6-3 either way or 7-2 either way. And then a
Right.
day later, when you add 20 more conversions, it's a completely different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, my favorite thing to see in a test, when I see a variation jump out to an early lead, I'm always like, just wait. It'll come, it'll come back down to earth. The other way is the one that makes me really excited, where the variation starts out poorly, or 3 days in, it's like still neck and neck. And you start to notice like that little bit of a trend. If it starts to peel away and peel away and peel away, and you get really confident in that because you go, okay, I see this steady, like it started off how it did. Again, law of low numbers, absolutely. Then as you just keep scaling and scaling and scaling that test, you go, okay, now we see that after its full run, that this variation was better.
Yep. Now, for a smaller store, because what I wanted to understand is, like, if I've been running my test for 2 months, am I just too small to be doing this, or do I just have to be patient?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I know that is, a bummer if you're thinking in your head, like, well, how am I supposed to make changes that improve my conversion rate if I can't test them? So I don't know for sure. And yet I don't have the amount of traffic to test a statistically significant difference. So what I recommend to those stores is you've really got to double down on the qualitative stuff. You've got to be using a tool like Hotjar or Microsoft Clarity. You should be periodically, I recommend once a quarter, running user tests. So the quick, the 1 minute primer on that is, again, a tool like playbook.ux or a tool like usertesting.com. It usually costs something in the neighborhood of $50 to $75 per test. You do not need 100 users. You need 10 maximum. You can say, find me people this age to that age, male, female, this is their career, all these different things, right? So find a set of users that look like your customers and simply ask them, and all these tools have templates, right? You go to our store, review the homepage, what can you tell us about how much you trust this store? All those things, and there's plenty of articles you can go to structure your user test. Doing that once a quarter will be eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
You will have an idea about what your value proposition is. You'll have an idea about how people shop your store. But until you see them do it and talk about sort of, they'll say things like this, like, oh, I guess when I clicked that, I sort of expected this to happen, but that happened. And that should raise red flags in your mind. Or people will say, I was watching one the other day, and the client, and again, this is going to sound so insignificant until you realize that this is happening at scale. So the person is trying to do a brand filter, right? So they have all these different brands. Maybe they have 100 different brands in this collection page. And every time they clicked a brand, a checkbox, it would close the box and update. Well, then now I have to go back. But wait a minute, I don't just like one brand, I like 6. So this guy was like, I'm so frustrated. I keep having to go back, open this, scroll all the way down for my brand, click it, and I know I want one of these 6 brands. This is driving me crazy. And you should be like taking copious notes, like, okay, we got to get this fixed, because again, this is how people actually shop our store. So if you don't have the traffic for A/B testing, you really need to be, diving into that qualitative stuff And then if you've got the quantitative side right, again, where your problems are occurring, why they're occurring because you've asked the right questions, then you can feel pretty damn confident in making the changes. Again, if we have a test that is backed by those two things, it is extremely unlikely that it hurts. Doesn't mean it's going to be a statistically significant powerhouse. Doesn't mean that. But it's very unlikely that at that point it's going to hurt, unless we've built it wrong, unless we broke something.
And just to add to that, one other qualitative piece of data that most owners have but don't look at is their product reviews. So,
oh goodness, yeah.
Turn on their product review. Like in Judge Me, you can set it like anything 4 and 5 stars automatically publish. And most stores do that. They don't want to show their 1 and 2 stars unless they look at them. And it's amazing to me how many store owners don't look at their negative reviews, even internally, because there's a lot of good feedback there. And your customers are taking the time out to tell you why they don't like it. So please go read your negative reviews, even if you don't publish them, and learn from them.
Yeah, one thing with every new client I work with, I simply ask them, please go into judge.me, Akendo, whatever, export all of your reviews, send them directly to me. I go through those for a ton of different things, but there's a couple that I'll talk about. One is simply, there is often a discrepancy in how brands talk about their products versus how their customers talk about their products. And I'm not necessarily talking about, we say it's great and they say it's great. It's specifically how they talk about the benefits. What words did they use when they talk about how this has how this has improved their situation, right? And you can then basically take those snippets and use that as your product copy, use that as your ad copy, use that as your headlines. Start talking like your customers actually sound.
Well,
Another one, go ahead.
For you, because I have a client named Medthusiast, and she sells T-shirts to nurses and doctors, right? And they're all medical themed and they're funny and that kind of stuff. And all the review comments, like every 10, at least 7 of them will use the same word, and it's soft. And she doesn't have crappy T-shirts. She has high quality. Right. She them, locally, and they're soft. And everybody mentions soft, 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 soft. And that's her messaging. We have the softest, we have the most comfortable T-shirts for you to wear to the office every day, and they're medically themed and they're fun. And she learned from what her customers said and used that in her merchandising.
Yeah, it's reviews are an absolute gold mine for copy. And to your point about the critical reviews, right? 2 things on that. One, if you only publish 5-star reviews, everyone thinks you're full of shit. It's just the truth. And this is actually something with enough traffic, I've actually A/B tested. Yes, 4.7 is better than 5.0.
Yep.
5.0 is not believable. And also the second part of that is, if you go and you find a critical 3 or 2-star review and you look at it and the person that's speaking is sort of doesn't sound crazy and sort of well thought out, for you to then post a reply to that, hey, I'm so sorry that you felt X, Y, and Z way about our product. You might say something like, we're actually working on another iteration thanks to your feedback. That's going to fit in this way. That's going to have that material. It shows, 1, that you aren't afraid of a negative review. And 2, it shows that you take feedback seriously. And then you're actually working to make a great product. That will help more than it hurts. It's a big mistake to only show the most positive reviews. People their spidey sense goes up.
Yeah, I have one client of all of mine who insists you publish all reviews regardless of, because there are crazy people, right? And I have no problem taking the crazy people out, but he insists he's going to post all his reviews because he wants to be that authentic and honest.
That's it for part 1 of our episode on A/B testing. Please check out episode 95 for part 2.
You've been listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast with Scott Austin. This podcast is brought to you by Jade Puma, a Shopify-focused agency located in San Diego, California. If you like what you heard, please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast.